Hey everyone, so we are about 2 hours east of Prague in the middle of the Czech Republic, and we've spent the last 3 days at a conference centre here in sort of the outskirts of in the countryside of Prague with the Czech Republic team. It's just been wonderful spending those 3 days with them, and we've been part of the conference where they've been trained in making disciples, sharing the gospel, and in planting churches. Troy and Rachel Cooper have been there with their family, and they've been inputting a lot, so we've been learning a lot from them. But one of the really interesting things we just wanted to share with you in this little video was what's the context of the Czech Republic in terms of the Christian faith?
Yeah, officially, the Czech Republic is the most atheistic country in Europe. And the history to that is quite complex, as it is, in all the countries through Europe. But the Czech Republic was under a communist rule, as Czechoslovakia combined with Slovakia, one country under communist rule for about 30 years after the World War II, and that ended with what's called the Velvet Revolution in 1989, so actually not all that long ago. And during the communist rule, you were allowed to be a Christian here in this country. You were allowed to meet in a church building as a church community. You were allowed to share the gospel, say, with your neighbour or something, but you weren't allowed to go out and just preach the gospel. And there was a lot of restriction on literature that was allowed into the country or to be used. And I asked one of the ladies actually who grew up in this and who got saved at that time, what was it like? I said, because you were under communist rule, did the gospel flourish in what was Czechoslovakia? And she said, no, it didn't. Not like it did in China, not like it did in Russia itself, but because it was restricted but not fully restricted, Christians still had the freedom. She said they really were just comfortable Christians a lot of the time. They were allowed to be Christians, they were allowed to go to church, they were allowed to have their Christian community, and so there was not a flourishing of the gospel. She said when the Velvet Revolution happened in 1989, then through the 90s, the gospel flourished, but she said the church actually wasn't ready at the beginning because they hadn't been trained and how to share the gospel, how to make disciples, how to plant churches. So there was a lot of scurrying, and some really went for it, and the gospel flourished for a time. But now, even although technically it's the most atheistic country in Europe, the truth is that most people believe in some form of God, and so they're not true atheists. There's sort of a spirituality. So that's the current soil for the planting of the gospel and the making of disciples, planting of churches, right now, right here in what is the Czech Republic.
And there's this couple, Pavel and Dianka, who are leading the No Place Left movement really here in the Czech Republic. And it's just been a joy watching them training the next generation of people with the gospel. They're using Three Circles Gospels, they've got it on the back of their phone. They're training them in the Four Fields approach to mission, which is what we're using back in New Zealand. Discovery Bible Study. And we're seeing all these people saying, I'm going to pray and ask that God would lead me to the place I need to be for the sake of the gospel. There are some people who are moving villages, moving towns to make sure they're where God wants them to be. And secondly, they're praying, God, where do you want me to connect with in my community? Now that might be joining some kind of team, some kind of group.
But like a hobby.
Yeah, but they're doing all of that to really make sure that they're being used for the gospel, and they're using those connections to ensure that they can share the gospel of Jesus. But we don't want to tell you too much more about their stories, because we're going to interview a couple of people, and we'll post those on this little channel, and you'll get to hear their stories of how God's using them in the gospel. So that's it from us for this one. Thanks for praying, and we'll keep you in touch with what's happening next. God bless.
Bye.